All right, good morning, everyone. I know people are still making their way in and all that good rain this morning. Just want to make sure everybody has a copy of the notes for this morning. It's just a short little handout. Sorry, again, I don't know why my iPad keeps messing up how it prints out, but it's a little small type there, but if you make sure everybody's got one. This is something I've just been thinking on here recently, as Pastor asked me to prepare for Sunday school and the morning service this week since they're away. This is just something that's been on my mind, and it comes from the fact of we serve a God who has done so much for us. We've talked about that throughout different series that I've been a part of and Pastor's been doing and others. God has done so much for us, but yet how easily can we forget what God has done for us? We get busy, we get crazy, but you think about it. I mean, we have them all throughout our house. I know everybody here probably has them in their house. You have pictures on the wall. You've got photo albums. You've got maybe it's a memory box. I know I still have one from when Candace and I were dating, and it has like notes that we gave to each other, different things that we did while we were dating, just a way to remember that time in our lives. We have photo albums that have pictures like of our kids when they were babies, or of us, or family vacations, different things like that. We're very good at keeping things that we want to remember and to treasure and to bring about the thoughts and the memories from those events, but yet so many times we tend to forget what God has done for us. And what we're going to read this morning in Joshua chapter 4 is just a reminder for us to set up memorials in our lives for what God has done and what that does for us as individuals, as a church, as families. And that's what I want to look at this morning as we look at this idea of what do these stones mean from Joshua chapter 4. So if you go in Joshua chapter 4 this morning, as we begin Joshua chapter 4, we're going to look at this time when the people of Israel set up a memorial for something that God had done for them. Joshua chapter 4, starting in verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe a man, and command ye them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones, and ye shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where ye shall lodge this night. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared of the children of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And Joshua said unto them, Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of Jordan, and take ye up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according unto the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean ye by these stones? Then ye shall answer them, that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever." And we're going to stop there because he sort of rehashes it, and it shows again what they did later on, which we're going to touch a couple of those verses later. But you see what God instructed Joshua to do. He says, you are getting ready to pass over the Jordan to enter the land that I have promised you, the land that I have promised your people. And he says, I want you to pick out 12 men to go in the midst of Jordan and grab a stone and take it over to the other side so you can set up a memorial. So this way, when your children in the future ask you, what do these stones mean? You can say, here's what the Lord did for us right here. It is a memorial. We have memorials, like I said, all throughout us. You go to Washington, D.C. I enjoy going to D.C. and going to the Lincoln Memorial, to the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Monument, all the different war memorials, and all these. I love going to memorials and seeing what is the purpose of this memorial. Who are we trying to remember? Who are we trying to bring to mind? Maybe heroic feats, or maybe moments of change in our country or in our community, whatever it may be. That's the purpose of memorials, is that when we go, we may not know exactly what that memorial is for until we start reading and say, oh, that's what happened right here. You go to any battlefield in, like whether Civil War, Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, wherever you go in the world, you go to a battlefield, they'll have markers showing what happened at this site. What happened at this moment on this day? We remember days throughout the year. We have the remembrance of D-Day, the remembrance of Pearl Harbor, all these different moments that we remember that are memorials for what happened, whether good or bad. And what they did here and what God commanded them here to do, it says, take you out 12 stones, set them up so that in the future you can remind the future generation, which we're going to get to, what God did for you here. So you have your notes in front. I don't have any blanks for you to fill in today. I just wanted to have this handout for you to reference back to. We're going to look at 5 things this morning in regards to setting up memorials in our lives and what memorials do for us. But number one, you see, memorials are encouraged by God. They're encouraged by God. It says, and it came to pass when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe of man. So God says, look, I want you to do this. This wasn't Joshua's idea. This wasn't another elder of the people of Israel's idea. God came to Joshua and said, look, I want you to do this for this reason. So memorials are encouraged by God. He encourages us to set up these moments in our lives. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of some practical applications at the end of it, but these are encouraged by God. So if you go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 6 real quick. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Like I said, you have the verses down there, so you can always reference them back in the future as well. But Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 12. Now we know Deuteronomy 6 deals a lot with what God truly expects of his people. You go back to like verse 3, it says, Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath promised thee, in the land that floweth with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And he continues on, but you look at verse 12. It says, Then beware, lest thou forget the Lord, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God and serve him, and shalt swear by his name. But he says, then beware. So he's like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to love me with all your heart, all your soul, all your might. I want you to do all this for me and to me. But he says, then beware, lest thou forget. That's the purpose of why God encourages memorials so much, is that we do not forget what he had done. Because think about the people of Israel in the end of Genesis going into Exodus. This is just from a secular point of view, but you look at the Egyptians. So you have the people of Israel in Egypt, because Joseph was there, and God had established Joseph to be the second in command. He spared the people of Israel during the famine. We all know that. Pastor's been going through that. But how does it start, or end of Genesis and into beginning of Exodus, is there arose those that did not know who Joseph was. The Pharaoh that came up did not know who Joseph was. And then we see what happened. They became slaves shortly after. Because the previous Pharaoh maybe hadn't passed it down to his son, or his son didn't pass it down to his son, however it fell in there, but it says they did not know who Joseph was. Not that we're saying we had to build a memorial for Joseph, but that's the fact of how quickly forgetfulness can interact with us and really change how we approach things. That's why I put on the bottom of your notes there, that little quote there at the bottom, forgetfulness breeds faithlessness. Forgetfulness breeds faithlessness. If we forget what God has done for us, we're going to quickly forget to put our trust in God. Yes?
I often will reflect on the night that I got saved, and it just reminds me of his love for me and his mercy.
Absolutely.
It's just part of my prayer. Thank you for your mercy. I didn't die in my sins.
Absolutely. And that's a memorial. Even if it's just you going back in your mind and thinking about the time you got saved and thinking about what God saved you from and then saved you to, that's a memorial. And you have your way of remembering that. That's why testimony times are very important in churches, for us to share what God has done. It's a verbal memorial for the things that God has done, whether they be big or small. In our eyes, it doesn't matter. They're encouraged by God. If you go back to Exodus chapter 12, we see the Passover. So this was the preparing to leave Egypt, to be delivered from Egypt. This is during all this time. Now he's setting up the Passover here in Exodus chapter 12 in verse 14. Exodus 12 verse 14 says, "And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." So he commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover as a memorial. And they still celebrate the Passover to today. It is to be a memorial for what God had done for them. Now, we have a New Testament example of that. We're going to get to it later on in one of the future points, but we have the Lord's Supper. What does he say? "This do in remembrance of me." It's a memorial for us every time we partake of the Lord's Supper, to be of remembrance for what God has done for us. So God encourages memorials. He encourages us to set up memorials in our lives. And they may be very specific to you, and you may be the only one that knows about them, and that's fine. You don't have to share all of them. But it's just an opportunity for you to go back with something and say, "Lord, thank you for what you've done for me. Thank you for the strength, for the presence, for the promises that you have. All these different things. Thank you for what you've done for me." So memorials are, number one, encouraged by God. But we see number two, back in Joshua chapter 4, we see number two, memorials are set forth as an example to future generations. There are some memorials that you shouldn't keep silent. You should share some of your memorials out to future generations, to children, to grandchildren, to great-grandchildren, if that is part of it. Joshua chapter 4 and verse 6 says that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, "What mean ye by these stones? Then ye shall answer them that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord." So he says that's one of the purposes of this, is that you can teach the future generations. Because once again, forgetfulness breeds faithlessness. And we're going to look at that here in a second. But he says, the reason I want you to build this memorial is not to show yourselves as anything special, but when your children ask, "Hey, what do these stones mean? Why are they set right here for this particular reason?" You say, "This is where the Lord delivered us into the land that he promised us. This is where he parted the waters so we could get across." That's what a memorial is for, is to teach future generations. Like I said, once again, we have all these memorials that we see around us. And hopefully it's for a reason that when families go to them, we can teach them what happened, the sacrifices that were made, the heroicism that was showed, all these, or even in case of, like, you consider concentration camps during World War II, like Auschwitz and places that you can still go to. It should be a reminder of the evil that is still present in this world. You can't go to Auschwitz and say, "Man, this was a fantastic visit. This was an amazing thing." No, it's terrible to see. But it should serve as a memorial to say there is evil in this world that must be countered. That's the reason for memorial. It may be good, it may be bad. So as I was thinking about this, there's plenty of things in my life that I am not proud of, that I am ashamed of. But there are memorials that I have set up in my life so that when I have moments with my son in the future, my daughter in the future, when they get older, I can pull them aside and say, "You know what, here's why I've kept these." Because Josiah has noticed one in my office. I have something in my office. And he's like, "Dad, what's that?" I'm like, "I'll tell you when you get a little bit older." Because it's an opportunity for me to share something with him and help him be the man God wants him to be. I have a reason for it. I'm building it up. I'm setting it up especially for an opportunity to teach him something from it. That's why I kept it. That's why it's something that's important to me, so that when I teach him, I can say, "Here's what God has brought me from, and here's what I'm helping you avoid." If that makes sense. So like I said, that's the reason. We're teaching the future generations the things that God has done for us, the things he's delivered us from, the things that he's given to us. That's why I've encouraged throughout the different series that I've done to keep record, whether through a notebook or your phone or whatever it is, keep a notation of things that God has done for you. Times he's provided for like faith promise missions. You're promising God to give this much. You're like, I don't know how this is going to happen, but Lord, I'm going to give this. And when he provides it for you, note it down, saying, here's how the Lord provided for that. So that when those times of trouble and trial and tribulations come, you can go back to him and say, no, the Lord provided for me every single time I promised to give something by faith. And I believed him, he provided. Because remember, forgetfulness breeds faithlessness. If we forget what God has done in every aspect of our lives, we'll soon come to find out like, ooh, I'm starting to think that I did all this to myself. Look at what I brought myself out of the whole idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. There's principle to that. But so many times we can be like a Nebuchadnezzar and say, look what all I've done. And look what God had to do to him. He said to bring him down. He said, no. This is nothing because of you. I placed you here. But he forgot what God has done. Think about those things. Forgetfulness breeds faithlessness. Memorials are encouraged by God, number one. Memorials are set forth as an example to future generations. We see that in Exodus 13, verse 14, back in there during the Passover. He says here, and I'll turn to it real quick, and y'all can turn to Psalm 78. We'll look at Psalm 78. I'll read Exodus 13 real quick. Exodus 13, verse 14. It says, and it shall be when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, what is this? That thou shalt say unto him, by strength of the hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, or brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. Once again, God is saying, look, in the future, when your children ask, why are we doing this? Referring back to the Passover here. Why do we celebrate the Passover? He says, here's why. Because it's by the hand of God, by the strength of God, he brought us out of bondage. He brought us out of Egypt. Like I said, nothing that they did. It's to remind them of what God has done, to teach the future generations. That's the importance of that. If you look at Psalm 78, if you're there, Psalm 78, verses 4 through 7, but I'll go back to verse 1 just to keep rolling the context in there. It says, give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he hath done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. That's the reason why. It's one of the reasons why God wants us to set up memorials, is to teach the future generations what God has done. Once again, not what we have done, but what he has done. So that they can take that and say, look at what the Lord did for my parents, for my church, for my family. And they can carry that faith in as they get saved and as they grow, as we nurture them, as it says in Proverbs 22, verse 8, train up a child in the way he should go. And when he's old, he will not depart from it. Part of that training is teaching them what God has done. Teaching them what God has done. So we have to keep those memorials to teach them so they can take those memorials and teach their children and their children and their children. We must incorporate these into our lives because they set forth an example for future generations. But number 3, memorials also reaffirm God's power, his presence, and his promises. In verse 7 of Joshua chapter 4, it says, then ye shall answer them that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. But look at what happened. He says, you're supposed to tell them exactly what happened, that the waters were cut off. They were cut off. Now, that doesn't mean the children of Israel went out there and built a little dam to stop the water so they could cross. No, it was like that. Think about the Red Sea. It was split apart so they could cross over and get away from Egypt. Think about the times coming up later in Joshua's life where through the Lord, he commanded the sun to stand still. All these different miraculous things that God has done. It starts for us with salvation. It starts with the moment of salvation. That is a miracle that God has done for us. We cannot do anything for that. I can't do any amount of good to make myself saved. It is by the power of God, the grace of God. So that's the first miracle we can show. Maybe there's other memorials in your life where God just miraculously healed, or God miraculously provided, or God miraculously protected through a situation where you're like, in all practical purpose and reasoning, I should be dead, or I should be injured, or I should be this. But God protected us. You look back at different wars, and there's times where God intervened and protected those that he needed to. All these different things that have happened because God will intervene. And that's an amazing thing. It reaffirms God's power. It reaffirms his presence in his promises. It reminds us of what he is, who he is, and what he has done. If you go back to Genesis chapter 9, we'll look at an example that still exists today. In Genesis chapter 9, and we'll start in verse 8, just to read the context in here. Genesis chapter 9, starting in verse 8, it says, "And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth, with you, from all that go out of the ark, to every beast of the earth, and I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there be any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations." Notice he's establishing here, he's like, I'm going to set up this memorial for you and for perpetual generations to understand what this means. And look at verse 13, it says, "I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh." He set up his own memorial. God gave us the example of it. He said, here you go. I'm going to set this up as a reminder, as a token that I will never destroy the earth, the whole earth, with a flood. But look at what's happened today with the rainbow. It's been taken to mean something completely different, to mean something completely deplorable, to mean something completely evil. When God said, no, I establish this as a token of my covenant with the earth, that I will never destroy the earth. That's why I don't find it hard to believe that the devil incorporated that imagery with the LGBTQ movement as to look at God and say, are you sure you don't want to destroy the world right now? He don't care about those people. Don't be mistaken. He doesn't care about the gays, the homosexuals, anything like that. He doesn't care about them. I have a feeling he used that to say, Lord, are you sure you don't want to destroy the earth again? Look at what they're doing with this. I wouldn't put it past the devil to do that at all. Just to put it back in God's face, saying, you put this here to remind us that you'll never destroy us. Are you happy with that decision now? We must remember why God gives us these certain memorials that he established. Like I said, the rainbow as a promise to never destroy the earth with a flood. The Lord's Supper as remembrance for what God has sacrificed for us. He established these things to reaffirm his power, his presence, and his promises. If you go with me to Exodus chapter 16, look at one other passage real quick. Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16, verse 32, and says, "And Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commandeth, fill an omer of it to be kept for your generations," is referring to the manna that he was providing in the wilderness. It says, "Fill an omer of it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness." Notice he's reminding them once again, the same principle is applying. He's like, it's nothing you did. He says, fill this to remind them of what I gave you in the wilderness, what I provided for you. Not you. It says, "See the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. And Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot and put an omer full of manna therein and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations." So we know that they put this pot of manna in the Ark of the Covenant as a reminder of what God had provided. What else is in the Ark of the Covenant that we're told? Aaron's rod that budded, symbolizing God's power. Saying, look what I can do with something that is perceived as dead. It is not attached to a root system or anything. I caused it to bud. And then what else? The tablets, the law. Saying, here's what I have told you to do. To be cherished and to be brought forth for every generation to remember what I have given you, what I have done for you, what I have provided for you. To reaffirm God's power and his presence. If you go to Exodus 31, we'll look at Exodus 31 real quick. Exodus 31, in verse 13, says, "Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that does sanctify you." Once again, not because of anything they've done. He says, the Sabbaths are to remind you that I am the Lord that does sanctify you. Because he set the example for us in creation. 6 days it took him to create the world, to establish everything that he wanted to, and then he set an example for us with the Sabbath for his people to say, look, I rested on the seventh day. Now, of course, when we take the Sabbath, we understand the Saturday, the Sunday, for us it's Sunday, but he established a date where he said, you know what, I'm going to take a break. God didn't have to. He had no reason to take a break except for to establish a principle with us that you need to rest, to sanctify yourselves, to spend time with me. Trust me, I get it. We get busy. I mean, I think about it myself. I had this thought this morning getting ready. I'm in the middle of a kitchen rehab project that is becoming a nightmare to me. And I was thinking, you know what? We got combined services. I'll have a little bit more time in the evening to knock out another section of them. I'm like, nope, I'm not. I'll do it tomorrow. Or actually, I'll do it someday this week when I get back from traveling. But that thought entered my mind. I'll have a little bit of extra time when I get home, so I'll just go ahead and knock out another portion of it. The Lord's like, no, take a break. Take it easy. It's a chance for us really to relax. And Sundays really have, for me, become a day where it's like I look forward to it. Because I get a chance to just break away from everything that I've got going on and just take a second to say, I'm going to rest a little bit. Physically, it's good for you. Mentally, it's good for you. Spiritually, it's good for you. To take that moment to rest. That's why he established it. He used the Sabbath for the people of Israel, for us, the first day of the week, to establish that memorial for future generations. To say, you know what, here's something we can do to remind our children, to remind our future generations, hey, it's okay. And God set this example for just relax for a minute. Not be so taken by the hustle and bustle and busyness and chaos of this world, but to take a moment and just say, well, I'm going to spend a little bit extra time with the Lord today. He reaffirms his power, his presence, and his promises through the memorials that we set up. And you see number 4, as we continue on, number 4, memorials call our hearts and minds to worship. To worship. Like was mentioned earlier, when we remember the moment of our salvation, the time where God saved us, it should put us in a mindset to worship him. To worship him. It's a call to us to remember what God has done, whether it's through provision, through salvation, through protection, whatever it may be, to say, Lord, thank you. Because what is part of worship? It's thanking God for what he's done. Taking time, just taking a second to step away and say, Lord, thank you for that. I consider everything that I was and where I could have been, but you in your mercy and your grace extended salvation to me so that now I don't have to be that. I don't have to go that path. I can now be set where you want me to be and have a home that is waiting for me instead of an eternity in hell. It should bring you to a place of worship. It should bring you to a place of just thanking God for what he has done. If you look at verse 24 back in Joshua chapter 4. Joshua chapter 4. In verse 24, right at the end of the chapter, says that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that ye might fear the Lord your God forever. And that idea of fear, of course, brings in that sense of worship for who God is. Not that we fear him because of any punishment or anything like that, but we are reverential. We are awestruck by who God is, by the strength that he possesses, by what he has done. It puts us in a place, in a mindset, or should, of worship. If you go with me to Psalm 103, we'll look at a couple of passages in Psalm 103. Psalm 103, we'll read verse 1 and verse 2. Verse 2 is the focal point. This is a Psalm of David. It says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name." Verse 2, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." And he proceeds to list some of those after that. But he says, "And forget not all his benefits." Look over to 106, Psalm 106. This is recounting the deliverance from Egypt. Verses 12 and 13 here. It says, "Then believed they his words, they sang his praise, they soon forgot his works, they waited not for his counsel." Notice the dichotomy that he pictures there in this poetry here. It says, then believed they his words, they sang his praise, they soon forgot his works, they waited not for his counsel, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness and tempted God in the desert. Like I said, think about that. It's a fascinating picture that's being drawn in just a few words there on a page. The children of Israel were delivered from centuries of bondage and miraculously delivered through the Red Sea and protected by God, to turn around in the wilderness and say it was better for us back there. How quickly they sang his praises when he delivered them, but as soon as they realized, oh, we're in the desert with nothing, they started to murmur, right? We see that all throughout the journey through the wilderness, this constant murmuring and complaining. Oh, this manna is so terrible that God has given us. We want this, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this. That sounds a lot like us, doesn't it? If you think about it. It really does if we're not careful. If we don't have those memorials set up to remind us of what God has provided for us, we can easily turn real greedy like a little child and say, but I want this. Okay, you gave me that. Okay, but I want this now. But I want this now. So saying, Lord, thank you for what you've done. I may not have everything I want, but that's okay. God tells us in the New Testament that he'll give us exactly what we need. Maybe not everything we want, but what we need. He'll provide for our needs. So it should call our hearts and our minds to worship, but look at what it did to the children of Israel here. They saw what God had done in the miracle of the Red Sea deliverance, to turn around and to forget what God has done, say it was better for us back there. At least we had onions and leeks and this and that. Yeah, we were slaves. It was a little rough. It was brutal, but we had stuff. What has God done for us? He says, really? Shaking his head, thinking, how ungrateful. But yet he still chose the people of Israel. As we've seen through the prophecy studies that Pastor's been doing, he's not done with the people of Israel. They have turned their backs on him. You look at how deplorable the nation of Israel is from a spiritual standpoint. But he says, I'm still going to uphold my promises to them. They've forgotten me, but I haven't forgotten them. It should bring our hearts and our minds to a place of worship. Psalm 145. Psalm 145. Verses 4 through 7. We'll start in verse 1 just to keep the context flowing there. This is David's psalm of praise, Psalm 145. I will extol thee, my God, O King, and I will bless thy name forever and ever. Every day will I bless thee, and I will praise thy name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. I will speak of the glorious honor of thy majesty and of thy wondrous works, and men shall speak of the might and of thy terrible acts, and I will declare thy greatness. They shall abundantly utter the memory of thy great goodness, and shall sing of thy righteousness. And he continues on. But notice what he says there right in the middle there in verse 4. One generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. One generation shall declare them to another. But what happens if that generation fails to declare the goodness of God to the next? We see that in Judges. Go with me to Judges chapter 2. Judges chapter 2. Judges chapter 2 in verse 10. And that leads us to the final point here in your notes, number 5, memorials fight against faithlessness. Because remember, forgetfulness breeds faithlessness. Judges chapter 2, verse 10 says, and also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done in Israel. And look at verse 11. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam. So there arose a generation that knew not God. So that generation failed by not passing on those memorials of what God has done and who God is to that next generation. And we see exactly what follows in verse 11. And they did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam. So you want to set your children up for success? Show them what God has done for you. You say, well, Aaron, I've done some bad things, and I've done a lot of bad. I don't want to show them that. Yes, you do. Like I said, I have stuff that I have set up so that when Josiah gets of the right age, I can pull him aside and say, here's exactly what God has brought me from and what I am trying to protect you from through God's power, not through mine. I'm a man. All I can do is show him what God has done for me to say, I don't want you to be there. So I'm keeping those things as a reminder, as a memorial, number one, to me of what God has brought me from through salvation, through sanctification, through those different aspects. But I can show my son, say, here's exactly why I'm hard on you on certain things. Because I know the damage that can be done. So yes, you do want to memorialize the harder times in your life. We don't want to forget them. Because what does forgetfulness breed? It breeds faithlessness. If you forget what God has brought you from, you don't trust God to protect you in the future. Memorials fight against faithlessness because look at what happened to the children of Israel. And there arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done. Notice that. They didn't know the Lord, but also number two, they didn't know the works he had done. That's why God encourages those memorials to be set up. He says, so when your children ask in future generations, what do these stones mean? He says, look at what God has done. He parted the waters. He cut off the Jordan so we could get across into the land he promised us. He did that. Not us. He did that. And that's what that memorial is for. Like I said, we remember things that we want to. Like I encouraged you to at the beginning, we all have pictures in our house, pictures from weddings, from births, from maybe even funerals, or have pictures of loved ones that have passed on because we want to remember them. We have things. Like I said, I have a little box in our closet in our room that have notes that Candace and I wrote to each other when we were dating. It's just a reminder of the times that we were dating. Because, being married with having kids, having a job, having stresses of life, sometimes we forget those things. We get so caught up. I look over here at Renee and Ryan. They're dating. They're in that great time. I think of Amy and Jordan, who are the newlyweds. We always talk about the honeymoon phase and all these different things, but you know what? It doesn't have to end. If we remember what God did for us as a couple, where he brought us from and how he brought us together and what he's brought us through, that can make this even stronger of a relationship. By having those little memorials to remember things that we've done. I mean, you think about, let's look at sports, for example. You watch college basketball or even high school basketball or anything like that. When a team wins a championship, whether a state or regional, national, or the national title in March for college basketball, what do? They cut down the nets. And every member of that team gets a little piece of that net. I got one from when we won a tournament. I don't have it anymore because I was like, it's fine. It's a piece of string. But it does actually serve a memorial for those people that enjoy that memory of that time playing basketball. We won that tournament. It was a close game. They can go back and relive that day a little bit, just from a little piece of string. The memorial can be anything. Anything the Lord puts on your mind to say, look, keep this as a memorial so you can teach your generation. They can teach theirs. They can teach theirs of what I have done for your family and for you. It can be personal. And then as a church, we should have memorials that we establish as a church. That's why we have homecoming services to remember when the anniversary of when the church began. That's a way to remember what God has done. And you think about our church and what God has done for us through the years. It's an opportunity for us to remember what God has done. It's not a bad thing. We consider the saying, you consider the saying of people like to say, well, back in the good old days. Those days aren't over. Yes, we live in dark days. We live in sinful days. But guess what? So did the older generation too. They had their problems. It doesn't have to be the good old days. It could be the good days right now. We use those memorials that were set up to remind us of what God has done, to establish and to build a future generation. They can say, look at what God has done. Yes, it's hard. There are times that are struggling. There's times of struggle. There's times of stress. There's times of trials and tribulations. But God is faithful, right? God is faithful. And if we have those memorials set up, when our children ask, when our grandchildren ask, what does this mean? Grandpa, Dad, what does this mean? Well, let me tell you what God has done. Like I said, it better not be what you've done. That's just pride. But to say, you know what? This is what God has done for me. This is what God has done for our family. This is what God has done for our church. And they say, wow, it means God can do that for me. And we carry that tradition forward. Like I said, there's some thoughts that I've had. I had something else in mind that I was going to do this morning, but I've been spending time thinking about that and want to encourage our church and each and every one here to set up those memorials. Like I said, it may be from some hard stuff. That's okay. Use it as a way to show God what God has done. Yes?
There was a time later on in Joshua that a memorial was set up, which almost caused a civil war between the nations when the 2.5 tribes was transjoined took it the wrong way in the beginning. So
Yeah.
it was set up to mean a good thing. And in Joshua, it says it wasn't for us to do sacrifices and offerings on, but it was a reminder
Of what?
that we are all, even though the Jordan River separated the nations, we're still the same people.
Yeah. But that shows, and that's a good point, because that shows exactly when the human mind gets involved in it too much and they start taking it the wrong way. I mean, we see that all throughout society today. You can say one thing and mean it the right way and in the way of truth and honesty and whatnot, but somebody takes it completely the wrong way. So we must be careful with stuff like that. But like I said, memorials are encouraged by God to remember what he has done. So I want to leave you with that this morning as we end and get ready for the morning service.